Nuclear power. Does it make you squirm? The fact is, depending on where you are, the power supplied to your apartment may come from a nuclear reactor, even if you don't want one to be sited behind your house. However, scientists continue to look for ways to make nuclear reactors better, and a breakthrough by a company working on nuclear fusion promises to change everything. What is nuclear fusion? What company has made the breakthrough? And how does the breakthrough affect you as a person? The richest 20% of the world population uses 55% of the primary energy. Their per capita consumption is almost 5 times as much as the rest of the world's population. Where does all that energy come from? The world generated a record 10% of its electricity from wind and solar in 2021, 59% from coal. Around 10% of the world's electricity last year came from about 440 nuclear power reactors. About 55 more reactors are under construction, equivalent to approximately 15% of existing capacity. However, with the breakthrough by scientists, the share of nuclear energy may just be about to shoot up. But how does this new nuclear technology work? Before we go into that, it's essential to understand how current nuclear reactors work. On paper, the process is simple. Nuclear power plants heat water to produce steam. The steam is used to spin large turbines that generate electricity. A nuclear reactor is driven by the splitting of atoms, a process called fission, where a particle called a neutron is fired at an atom, which then fissions into 2 smaller atoms and some additional neutrons. Some of the released neutrons then hit other atoms, causing them to fission too and release more neutrons. This is called a chain reaction. The fissioning of atoms in the chain reaction also releases a large amount of energy as heat. The generated heat is removed from the reactor by a circulating fluid, typically water. This heat can then be used to create steam, which drives turbines for electricity production. In order to ensure the nuclear reaction takes place at the right speed, reactors have systems that accelerate, slow, or shut down the nuclear reaction and the heat it produces. This is normally done with control rods, typically made out of neutron-absorbing materials such as silver and boron. Nuclear reactors come in many different shapes and sizes. Some use water to cool their cores, whilst others use gas or liquid metal. The most common power reactor types use water, with more than 90% of the world's reactors being water-based. Nuclear reactors can run for 24 hours a day for many months, if not years, without interruption, whatever the weather or season. Additionally, most nuclear reactors can operate for very long periods of time, over 60 years in many cases. For instance, in 2019, Units 3 and 4 at the Turkey Point plant in Florida became the first reactors to be licensed for 80 years of operation. The most commonly used fuel in nuclear reactors is uranium. Uranium is abundant and can be found in many places around the world, including in the oceans. Other fuels such as plutonium and thorium can also be used. Most of today's reactors contain several hundred fuel assemblies, each having thousands of small uranium fuel pellets. A single pellet contains as much energy as 1 ton of coal. A typical reactor requires about 27 tons of fresh fuel each year. In comparison, a coal power station of a similar size would consume more than 2.5 million tons of coal to produce as much electricity. However, nuclear fission reactors have their disadvantages. For example, the radiation emitted during the fission reaction is harmful to humans and animals. The workers exposed while working at nuclear power plants are at a significant risk of radiation poisoning, cancer, and other diseases associated with radiation. High vulnerability is a potential risk that is involved in nuclear power plants. The enormous energy produced in a fission reaction can be utilized to create nuclear weapons. Any minor accident at a nuclear power plant can cause colossal damage, affecting the lives of millions. The waste released from the nuclear power plant is highly radioactive and harmful to all living beings. There are high chances of water contamination from these plants, which can cause serious diseases and death in living beings. This is where a company known as First Light comes in. First Light Fusion is into nuclear power but uses a different process. The British outfit claims it has achieved nuclear fusion with an approach that could provide cheap, clean power. First Light is a spin-out from the University of Oxford. It has used a technique called projectile fusion to accelerate fuel at 200 times the speed of sound. First Light's technique has been applauded by the UK's Business and Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng, who described it as having the potential to revolutionize power production. The technique is inspired by pistol shrimp, which have an oversized claw that can click shut at very high speed. Projectile fusion is more uncomplicated, more energy efficient, and cheaper than traditional approaches. Dr. Nick Hawker, co-founder and CEO of First Light Fusion, said their approach to fusion is all about simplicity. He believes that due to its simplicity, projectile fusion is the fastest path to commercially viable power generation from fusion. Traditional approaches tend to involve inertial fusion, in which a small amount of fuel is injected by a laser and sparked to make it burn. First Light set out to develop a new method to achieve nuclear fusion that is simpler, more energy efficient, and has a lower physics risk. Instead of using complex and expensive lasers or magnets, projectile fusion uses a high-velocity projectile. First Light uses a large two-stage hypervelocity gas gun to launch a 100G projectile at a pellet containing the fusion fuel in the form of tritium and deuterium. The projectile reaches dizzying speeds of 14,540 miles per hour or 23,399 kilometers per hour before hitting the target. That is about 20 times the speed of sound. As the fuel is hit by the projectile, it accelerates to over 156,586 miles per hour or 252,000 kilometers per hour. This is about 200 times the speed of sound, creating a pulse of fusion energy. First Light boasts the fuel becomes the fastest moving object on Earth at that point. In terms of how this would apply to a large-scale nuclear power plant, the target containing the nuclear fusion fuel would be dropped into the reaction chamber before the projectile is launched downwards through the same entrance. The projectile would then catch up with the target, impacting it at just the right moment, creating a pulse of fusion energy. The energy is absorbed by lithium flowing inside the chamber, heating it up. The flowing liquid protects the chamber from the vast energy release, sidestepping some of the most challenging engineering issues in other approaches to fusion. Finally, a heat exchanger transfers the heat of the lithium to water, generating steam that turns a turbine and produces electricity. First Light's goal is to develop a nuclear power plant in which the process would be repeated every 30 seconds. And despite being just a few millimeters in size, the company claims each target pellet could generate enough energy to power the average UK home for more than 2 years. Compared to inertial fusion techniques which require expensive lasers and magnets, First Light's equipment is simple and dirt cheap. According to the firm, it has spent less than £45 million to achieve fusion. Dr. Hawker explained his team aims for simplicity in the power plant engineering and wants to make the fusion process itself as simple as possible. The key technology is the target designs. There is no doubt they are complex, but the physics is simpler than other fusion approaches because it can be understood and simulated accurately. With the preliminary results, First Light has proven its radically new method for inertial fusion works, but more importantly, the company has established its design process. First Light even claims the design used to achieve this result is already months out of date as they have been refining the process. Dr. Hawker said, "As soon as we reach the maximum with one idea, we invent the next, and that incredible journey of discovery is what is so exciting." Having achieved nuclear fusion, the team is now planning a gain experiment in which more energy is put out than in, but the firm believes it won't be long before it has a working nuclear fusion plant. First Light is working towards a pilot plant producing about 150 megawatts of electricity and costing less than $1 billion. Let's hear what you think of First Light's nuclear fusion technique in the comments section.